Every year, thousands of people go missing in our national forests. But some stories aren't about vanishing. They're about what happens when you come back. Fundamentally changed. These aren't campfire tales. These are documented accounts of moments when the fabric of reality seemed to fray. We're going to look at 3 of them. So, are these events simply the misinterpretations of a mind under extreme stress? Or are there thin places in the world where the normal rules we rely on just stop? To begin to understand, we're not starting with an impossible event. We're starting with a single, simple mistake made by a man who was just trying to get home. That man's name was Joseph Brambila, and for him, home was a working-class world in the shadow of giants. He didn't come from money or a family of seasoned mountaineers. His instructors weren't expensive guides leading him up practice slopes. His classroom was YouTube, his evenings spent studying the techniques of men who moved across ice and snow with an effortless grace he dreamed of. His goal was Mount Whitney, all 14,505 feet of it. The plan was to conquer it solo, a pilgrimage to mark his 21st birthday in November of 2025. This climb wasn't just about adventure. It was about proving something. Proving that a kid who taught himself could stand on the same summit as those born into that world. He gathered his gear. Among it, a shiny new ice axe. It looked professional, felt solid in his hands. A key to a new kingdom. He had some experience. He'd even filmed himself happily sliding down a snowy slope, or glissading, the summer before. But that was June, in soft, forgiving snow. This was November. The mountain was a different animal now, harder, colder, and infinitely less patient. He made the ascent, and he was strong. Hour after hour, he pushed upward, drawing on that deep well of ambition. He ignored the burning in his lungs, the ache that settled deep in his bones. In his determination to prove his worth, he pushed his body to its absolute limit, and then past it. When he finally stood on that windswept summit, alone, he had done it. He had succeeded. But in that exhausting triumph, a single, fatal miscalculation was already taking root. That miscalculation took shape just moments later. There on the summit, in the biting wind, Joseph wasn't entirely alone. He met another climber, a man named Luis Bueno. Bueno was experienced, and he was looking at the fading light with a healthy respect. He was preparing for the long, winding but safe descent down the established trail. For a body pushed to its absolute limit, the thought of another 6 or 7 hours of hiking felt like an impossible demand. Joseph's mind, clouded by exhaustion, latched onto a memory from 5 months earlier, in June. He remembered a steep snowfield on the east face of the mountain, a perfect slope for a glissade, a controlled, seated slide that could cut hours off the descent. He told Bueno he wouldn't be taking the long way. He was going to take a shortcut. Backpacker magazine would later confirm that Bueno, and possibly others that day, tried to warn him. They pointed out the coming darkness, the unforgiving nature of the mountain in late autumn. Joseph, fueled by the overconfidence that only deep fatigue can produce, waved it off. The shortcut was his plan. He moved toward the edge of the east face, his mind fixed on that summer memory. Soft, forgiving snow, a fast and exhilarating ride down. He found the slope he was looking for. It looked just as he remembered. This was the point of no return. He lifted his foot and stepped out onto the surface he believed was snow. But the sound that came back was wrong. The snow under his boots didn't squish. It crunched. It was hard, almost like concrete. What he was standing on wasn't the soft blanket of snow he remembered from June. It was a solid, polished sheet of ice. There was no time to react. The moment his weight fully committed, the illusion of control vanished. The world beneath him wasn't snow. It was a mirror of ice, tilted at a 45-degree angle. He didn't slide so much as he was erased from the mountainside in a single, terrifying acceleration. The sound was not a scream, but a brief, violent scrape of fabric against ice, and then only the sound of the wind, carrying nothing. Hours later, when Joseph didn't make his scheduled check-in call, a quiet worry began to form. By the next morning, that worry had grown into a certainty that something was deeply wrong. His family reported him missing. Immediately, the professionals of the Inyo County Search and Rescue began to mobilize. A massive operation was sparked. But the mountain had other plans. What descended upon them was not just a winter storm. Official reports would later call it a powerful atmospheric river event, a torrent of moisture from the sky that translated into feet of blinding snow on the ground. It created a total whiteout. The world dissolved into a churning, featureless gray. Every landmark, every ridge, every sense of direction was simply gone. The risk of avalanches became so extreme that it felt as though the mountain itself was holding its breath, ready to exhale destruction at any moment. And yet, through that chaos, a single, fragile glimmer of hope appeared. A climber, who had been descending just before the storm hit its peak, reported seeing something. A black shape in the snow, in a location consistent with where Joseph might be. For his family, hearing this news was like being thrown a lifeline. They clung to that image. A black shape. It had to be his tent. It had to be. They pictured him in their minds, hunkered down, safe, just waiting for the storm to pass. Fueled by that hope, a ground team attempted the impossible. They pushed into the heart of the storm, fighting their way through chest-deep snow, where every single step was a battle. And they got close. Unbelievably close. They came within just 50 yards of the coordinates of that reported black shape. 50 yards. A stone's throw. But the ferocity of the storm formed a wall between them and that location. The wind was a physical force, and the snow was a loaded gun pointed right at them. The team lead made the agonizing call. The avalanche danger was no longer a risk, it was a certainty. They were forced to turn back. 50 yards away, the answer lay hidden under the snow. But for the rescuers, and for Joseph's family waiting by the phone, it might as well have been on another planet. Over a month passed. The atmospheric river, that planet of wind and snow, finally dissipated. In the brief, fragile window of clear weather that followed, a helicopter was dispatched back to that last known location, back to the coordinates of the black shape. The noise of the storm was gone. Down below, the world was blanketed in an immense, sterile silence. And from the air, the rescue crew could see it. The shape was not a tent. It was not a shelter. The tragic truth, which they confirmed upon landing, was that the shape was the partially buried body of Joseph Brambila. The investigation that followed provided a clear, almost clinical explanation for what had happened. There was no mystery, only a heartbreaking chain of events. The Inyo County Coroner's report cited the cause of death as a significant fall. Joseph, in his ambition to descend the mountain quickly, had attempted to glissade, to slide down a steep slope of snow on his feet. But he wasn't on snow. He was on solid, unforgiving ice. He lost control almost instantly, accelerating to a speed that was unsurvivable. The most tragic detail was what he was carrying. It wasn't a mountaineering ice axe designed to bite into ice and perform a self-arrest to stop a fall. Analysis concluded he was carrying something that looked like a garden axe. He had the ambition, but he lacked the experience, and crucially, the one tool and the one skill that could have saved his life. He collided with the rocks below, and his journey ended there. The physics of the fall are simple. Tragic, but simple. And if every story ended this way, with a clear, rational explanation, you could turn this video off now and sleep soundly. But they don't, because this is a story about the rules of a mountain. The next story is about a place where the rules of reality itself seem to break. That place is the Okefenokee Swamp in Georgia. And on April 3rd, 2000, Shirley Ivy and her family took a detour on their road trip, driving straight into it. The Okefenokee is a national wildlife refuge, a labyrinth of waterways covering nearly 500,000 acres. On the surface, it's a place of stunning, prehistoric beauty. But there's an atmosphere there. The water is dark, stained by the peat, looking almost exactly like black tea. Spanish moss hangs from the cypress trees like long gray beards, and the air is thick with a humidity you feel you have to wear. It can feel dreamlike, disorienting. Looking for a short adventure, the family rented a small motorboat. The plan was simple: a quick trip down a well-marked canal to a picnic area and back. It was a route designed to be impossible to get lost on. But from the moment they pushed off from the dock, Shirley, a 41-year-old mother from Michigan, felt a deep and inexplicable sense of unease. A quiet, internal alarm that something was wrong. The first concrete sign came not from what they saw, but from what they felt. The passage of time. The journey to the picnic area was supposed to be brief. Instead, it just stretched. What should have taken minutes dragged on for what Shirley would later describe as an hour, maybe more. They were moving. The motor was running, but the destination seemed to recede before them. This wasn't just being lost. This was a deeper kind of wrongness. The quiet, creeping feeling that the very rules of the world were starting to fray at the edges. That feeling, that deep wrongness from the stretched-out passage of time, clung to them. They reached the picnic area, but the destination brought no relief. The air felt heavy, stagnant. They didn't stay long. The decision to turn back was unspoken. A shared instinct to flee whatever was fraying the edges of their world. So they pushed off, the small boat's motor humming, cutting through that black, tea-colored water. They were on their way back. They were almost safe. They were barely 30 feet from the dock they had departed from. Just a few more moments. Then, the engine sputtered and died. The sudden silence was absolute, a heavy blanket falling over them. And in that silence, they all saw it. It shouldn't have been there. It couldn't have been there. The main canal, their only path back, was gone. In its place, blocking the channel completely, was what appeared to be a solid wall of earth. It wasn't a new obstruction. Shirley would later describe it with perfect, chilling clarity. It was a solid earthen bank, about 18 inches high, and it was covered in dry, tall grass. It was completely solid, and looked, she said, like it had been there for 100 years. 100 years. A dry, ancient dam standing where open water had been just minutes before. The confusion on their faces was a slow-motion cascade. It started as a question. Had they taken a wrong turn? But they were only 30 feet from the dock. It shifted to disbelief, minds refusing to process the image. And finally, as they stared at that impossible, solid barrier, the unease they'd been feeling all afternoon curdled into cold, sharp panic. They were trapped, not by the swamp, but by something that defied the very laws of existence. In the sudden, ringing silence that followed, a new sound began. It was faint at first, a soft, rhythmic dipping in the water coming from further up the channel. As the family stared in disbelief at the earthen wall blocking their path, a canoe drifted into view. In it, an elderly couple, paddling with a slow, unhurried grace. They seemed completely at peace, a part of the swamp's ancient stillness. Shirley, seeing other people, felt a surge of desperate hope. She started shouting, waving her arms, trying to warn them about the blockage, trying to get them to stop. But the couple didn't seem to notice. They didn't look over. They didn't change their pace. Their paddles continued to rise and fall, leaving perfectly calm ripples in the dark water as they moved directly towards the center of that impossible solid wall. And then, the moment that would forever separate their lives into before and after. The canoe did not stop. It did not turn. It glided forward, and the front of the boat simply vanished into the wall. The couple, serene and unblinking, followed, their forms passing through the packed earth and tangled dead grass as if it were nothing more than a projection. A heat shimmer. For a heartbeat, they were there. And then they were gone. The water on the other side remained undisturbed. The Ivy family said nothing. There were no words for what they had just seen. In a shared, unspoken agreement, they turned the boat around and retreated to the little wooden dock they had just left. When they summoned the courage to look back, moments later, the channel was clear. The wall was gone. There was no sign it had ever been there. The return journey was even more unsettling. The trip out, which had taken them over an hour, was now completed in just a few minutes. The landscape blurred past them in a way that felt wrong, as if the swamp itself was eager to eject them. Back at the rental office, still trembling, Shirley tried to explain what had happened to a young man behind the counter. He listened with a bored expression, then shrugged. He denied any possibility of a blockage. And then he added, with a chilling casualness, "Oh, you mean between markers 3 and 4? Yeah. You were just boating over the old burial ground." The mystery wasn't solved. It was reframed. The glitch in their reality now had a name, a place, a history, a quiet, folkloric reason that explained nothing, yet somehow, everything. The Ivy family stumbled into a tear in reality, and they did the only thing they could. They ran. But what happens when you don't run? What happens when you feel that same cold touch of the impossible? And instead of fleeing, you stop, you call out into the darkness, and something answers. His focus snapped from the sky to the inside of the car. The world outside remained caught in that profound, unnatural silence, what researchers call the Oz factor. But the terror was no longer a distant light in the heavens. It was right here. He followed his daughter's terrified gaze. Josie wasn't looking up, like him and her older brother. She was staring intently at her own passenger side window, her hand pressed against her mouth. Mark's own heart hammered against his ribs. What? What is it? He leaned over the center console, trying to see what she saw in the oppressive dark. At first, nothing. Just the reflection of their own pale, frightened faces against the blackness of the Missouri woods. But then, as his eyes adjusted, he saw it. Pressed close to the ground, just outside her door, was a shape. Or rather, a swarm of them, clustered together into one moving mass. It matched the description of what they'd seen darting across the road earlier. Dozens of brown and tan forms, a chaotic knot of what looked like legs and motion. The entire thing seemed to shimmer, becoming semi-translucent at the edges, as if it wasn't fully occupying our physical space. And it was not looking at the sky, it was looking in. In that single, horrifying moment, Mark's spiritual curiosity, his adventurous spirit, all of it just evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, primal dread he had never known. This wasn't a phenomenon to be studied. It was a predator, and he, in his arrogance, had rung the dinner bell. Out here, in the ancient dark of wild Missouri, help wasn't just miles away. It felt like it was in another reality. The mass of shapes shifted. A section detached from the main cluster and drifted impossibly upwards. It moved without sound, without effort, stopping directly in front of Josie's window. And then, through the crushing, absolute silence, a new sound began. A soft, wet scraping against the glass. His fascination had overridden his caution. The strange, geometric lights hanging in the Missouri sky were a siren's call, and Mark felt an overpowering urge to get a clearer view, to be closer. It was a reckless impulse. He turned the car off the main road and pointed it up a small, grassy hill. He reached the crest, killed the engine, and then clicked off the headlights. The world plunged into an immediate, profound darkness, leaving only the faint, eerie glow from the object above. He told his family he'd be right back. He stepped out of the car, closing the door softly behind him, his eyes still fixed on the sky. And that's when it hit him. It wasn't the darkness that was wrong. It was the silence. A dead, absolute quiet. There were no crickets, no wind rustling the tall grass, no distant highway hum. The world's sound had been completely erased, as if a switch had been thrown on reality itself. His curiosity evaporated, replaced instantly by a wave of pure, primal fear. The hairs on his arms stood erect, a cold dread, completely unrelated to the temperature of the night air, washed over him. He was no longer an observer, he was prey. He had made a terrible, terrible mistake. He scrambled back to the car, his hand fumbling for the door handle, yanking it open and throwing himself inside. His breath was a frantic gasp in his own chest, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the crushing void outside. As he jammed the key into the ignition, his fingers clumsy and shaking, a small, quiet voice cut through the silence from the back seat. "Dad." He didn't wait for a second word. At Josie's quiet command, Mark slammed the accelerator to the floor. The car lurched forward, tires churning in the dirt, and he didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. He just drove, away from the dead silence, away from the scraping on the glass, away from the light in the sky. He drove until the familiar glow of streetlights appeared through the trees, a sign that they had broken through the invisible boundary and returned to their own world. Later that night, in the sterile safety of their brightly lit kitchen, the silence returned. But this time, it was different. It was heavy with the need to understand. How do you process something that your mind refuses to accept? You try to give it form. Mark took out paper and pencils. He and his older son, Brody, sat at the table, each trying to capture the impossible, to document it. Both of them drew the same thing. A precise, geometric shape in the sky. A massive, silent U that hung there, defying explanation. They compared notes on its structure, its lights, its sheer scale. They were trying to solve a technical mystery, to rationalize the anomaly they had witnessed. And then, they turned to see what 5-year-old Josie had drawn. Her paper didn't show a ship. It showed a monster. It was a child's drawing, simple and crude, yet the details were chillingly clear. Her father recognized it instantly. A tall, fuzzy thing with a massive, broad body. Its arms were unnaturally long, dangling almost to the ground. And it had a huge, blunt head that seemed to sit directly on its shoulders, with no visible neck. It was a shape born of nightmare, not engineering. The horrifying truth settled over the room, cold and suffocating, while Mark and Brody had been mesmerized by the lights in the sky. Josie had been watching the ground. Her drawing revealed what was happening outside their field of view. That huge, hairy creature wasn't just standing there. It was in motion. It was rushing directly towards their car. The object in the sky, the thing they thought was the entire phenomenon, it was just a lure, a distraction, and they were the prey. Mark slowly lowered his daughter's drawing. He looked from the monstrous shape rendered in crayon to his little girl's face, her eyes still wide with a memory he could now finally understand. The naive, hopeful invitation he had sent out into the woods, "We come in peace," had been heard. And it had been accepted. But not by explorers from the stars. He wasn't an observer who had made contact. He was bait that had just been missed. Bait that was just missed. A family that stepped out of time. A hiker who misjudged a single fatal afternoon. We've walked through 3 very different kinds of stories. A tragedy on Mount Whitney, born of simple, understandable human error. A bizarre, impossible glitch in the fabric of a Georgia swamp. And a narrow, chilling escape from something that uses our own curiosity as a lure. On the surface, they seem unrelated. A mistake, a mystery, a monster. But they all touch that same primal nerve. They all whisper the same unsettling idea, that the world we think we know is perhaps much larger, stranger, and far more indifferent to us than we're prepared for. So, of these 3 stories, 1 of human error, 2 of inexplicable phenomena, they all leave a mark. The question is, which one will stay with you the longest? And have you ever had a moment out there in nature where things just didn't feel right? Where the silence felt wrong, or the landscape seemed to shift? If you have, this is the place to share it. Tell us your story in the comments below. If this journey gave you chills, I would appreciate a like on the video. And if you wish to continue exploring these thin places together, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the unexplained.